Welcome, everyone, to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss all the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Chang, and joining me, as always, is my co host, Rudy Tamarchio. We have a ton to talk about, from the Canes to the first batch of the CFP rankings to who are the real contenders for the playoffs. We'll kick off today's show like we always do, looking at our Miami Hurricanes. heads to Atlanta to take on the Yellow Jackets of Georgia Tech. Rudy, do the Canes get revenge for last year, or will they be running into a buzzsaw?
They circled this game on their calendar a long time ago, and it doesn't matter if Haynes King is back. He's already been announced as one of the captains for the game, so we're
Ooh,
likely going
yeah.
to see him. We'll see their leading tackler back from injury, too. I believe it's like their middle linebacker, and I don't think any of it's going to matter, whether it's a blowout or if it's another close game. Feeling good about our Canes,
Yeah.
particularly because we know everyone had this game circled after what happened last year.
Yeah, we've got a noon kickoff. The series is tied 14-14. It is the last stop on the revenge tour of this season. Miami has beat every team that handed them an L last season so far, with the Yellow Jackets being the most embarrassing loss. Last year, the Yellow Jackets went 74 yards in 24 seconds, scoring a winning touchdown with 2 seconds left to beat 23-20. Now, Georgia Tech is coming off their second bye week. Georgia Tech has been missing their QB Haynes King with an injury to his throwing shoulder, and linebacker Kyle Effer, that's who you were looking for, Rudy, for the last two games. But apparently they have been named captains, which means they will most likely play. What are the odds, Rudy, you think that both of these gentlemen play on Saturday?
I absolutely think they're playing. I mean, it's one of those where, yeah, the bye week definitely helps to come back from injury, but at the same time, like, this is your season at this point. They don't really have much to play for. They want to be the ones to be spoiler, as everybody does, because when you play Miami this year, you can automatically make like 70-yard field goals, and you end up having like your best offensive production, whether it's exploiting a defense that's having issues communicating and also just being up because it's your Super Bowl. So I would be very surprised if one or both of them didn't play on Saturday, to be honest.
Yeah, it's their homecoming. I have zero doubts that both of them will be playing. I mean, it's going to be crucial for King to play for Georgia Tech for them to even stand a competitive chance, in my opinion. They're a completely different team without him. And even with Zach coming back, or Kyle, excuse me, Kyle Efford, their star linebacker. He's basically their Mike linebacker, their quarterback on their defense. And I think he's really kind of going to be a competitive edge on the defense for them to stay in the game. Again, I don't necessarily believe Georgia Tech will win this game, but I think it will be closer than a lot of people expect. Georgia Tech has two key wide receivers in Malik Rutherford. He's kind of their screen guy. He does the quick donkey passes. Then you have their deep threat guy, who is Eric Singleton Jr., who are averaging 12 and 13 yards respectively a catch. So a lot of these Georgia Tech wide receivers all have double digits, because Georgia Tech likes to use the explosive plays, which gets me a little worried with our secondary. But something tells me Cam Ward's going to have a lot of time in the pocket. And so I'm not that worried about Georgia Tech scoring a few points, because I know Cam Ward, when compared to their defense, which we'll get into in a few minutes, will be lighting them up all over. And then also, like, both of those receivers have over 500 receiving yards for the season. So these guys aren't slouches. This isn't what was the old coach who ran the triple option again?
Oh, Paul Johnson?
Paul Johnson. Yeah, this isn't the Paul Johnson Georgia Tech you're used to. These guys like to go a little bit more vertical, which was a little bit different for last year. I remember last year's game, Rudy. It was one of those weird things. We when we came into that game, it was a weekday game at night. I believe it was a Thursday game. It was our ACC opener, and it was raining, and you could just tell something was off. I don't know. Did you sense something was off that night, off the rip, or did you kind of see the game going the way it did last year?
The only reason I sensed something bad off the rip was because one of the guys I was sitting with last year, this guy named Anthony Romano, who was in box one in field club, as soon as he stepped in the box, he just went, I got a bad feeling, man. I got a bad feeling. Like, well, what is it? It's like, I don't know. We're 5-0. We're wearing black jerseys. Something, this just screams letdown. It screams letdown to me. And every time something weird happened, like every Tyler Van Dyke pick, every like other issue that happened, he just look over, drop the sunglasses and go,
Yeah.
and then, the whole, not to beat a dead horse, towards the end of the game where they're running the clock out instead of taking the knee. And it's funny because, like, the entire time, three of us in that box are having the same conversation. We're like, I feel like we could start taking knees by now. And then
Yeah,
just
right.
hand the ball off again. It's like, well, if they want to give him some practice. And then we all like looked over and went, wait, what happened? And then you saw the replay and went, "Oh no, it's fine." And then you realized it wasn't fine. And then defensively, we're like, "No, it's fine. They got to go a really long way." And then you can, like, from our vantage point, because we were low at field level, we
Yeah.
could see where Haynes King is looking, and we could see a defensive back slip, and we could see the receiver going open. Like, please don't throw the ball. Throws the ball, and we had a very angry night. So,
Yeah, it
yeah,
wasn't pleasurable, but enough about last year. Let's talk about this year. I don't think it's going to be as close as a lot of people think. I do. One thing that does worry me is Miami's 104th against the screen passes, and Georgia Tech is in the top 15 of utilizing those screen passes. So it's like our weakness is kind of like their bread and butter. So again, not to say that it's going to be a 65-52 game, but don't expect it to be like an old Georgia Tech Miami game of the past where we would go up 3 touchdowns and just kind of cruise on that. We do usually play well in Atlanta, which I always feel good. I don't know why. I mean, the history would say differently. It's actually quite even in Atlanta, but
yeah,
I always feel pretty good when we play in Atlanta. So it'll be interesting. Georgia Tech only has given up 4 sacks this season, so with that D line not being as potent as it's been towards the beginning of the season, the last couple games, I'm hoping that maybe Ruben Bain, Simeon Barrow can kind of get up for this game. Tyler Barron maybe show up, show out, and get this guy on the floor because something just tells me with Haynes King with it being his throwing shoulder, not to say he's rushing back, but it's like how good could he be? You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah, the other issue too is he's a pretty mobile quarterback. He's a guy that likes to use his feet to try to get first downs. It's kind of what hurt Miami last year was him being able to buy time and get guys open. If your throwing shoulder's hurting you, you're also not going to be able to run that much because you're taking extra hits.
Yep.
So it's going to be hard to do like a quick passing game with that. So they might have to rely heavily on their running game. Remember, they're the first ones to expose Florida State for how bad they are physically running the ball. So if they try doing that, Miami has shown issues there in the secondary as well in terms of meeting gaps, and the linebackers have struggled to set the edge. So if they use like they take a page out of Louisville's book and go with misdirection runs, that could be tough for Miami to stop as well. And think of it this way too, that keeps Miami's offense off the field if they're able to keep eating clock by running the ball. So it definitely poses a challenge. I'm curious to how Miami's defensive line comes out to play because, like you mentioned, getting pressure on Haynes King, but also kind of containing him if he tries to use his legs, because I think that's what they were trying to do with Malik Murphy last week against Duke, and
Yeah.
it resulted in less sacks because you're watching them kind of like hold and try to essentially keep him in a box and keep him
Yeah.
from moving or stepping out. I wonder if they do the exact same thing. So that's where the secondary has to step in, because if your defensive line, your linebackers get like a coverage sack basically, where then nobody's open for a long time,
Yeah.
it's helpful. But if one of those receivers get behind you, that's another story.
Yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned getting their run game going. It's actually funny you mentioned that because this team is plagued with injuries. I mean, we talked about their quarterback and their middle linebacker who are coming back from injury, but they're on their third string running back, so it's not like they're going to be able to ground and pound. I mean, he hasn't been that efficient, and they're only averaging 23.8 points a game, and you're going to need at least 35 points to keep up with Miami, in my opinion.
You need
You know,
50.
yeah, you're going to need way
You
more than that.
need 50.
But here's the worst part. Conversely, their defense is giving up 24.4 points a game. So it's like if they're only averaging 23 and their defense is giving up 24 a game, it's like that's not a recipe for winning. You know what I mean? You're going to lose
Yep.
more times than not. And there's zero. Their defensive line gives zero pressure. They only have 11 sacks on the season. That's 129th in college. So that's basically the bottom of the barrel
Yep.
for sacks. So I think Cam Ward's going to basically, and then they also have secondary issues. I think this is going to be another Heisman moment for Cam Ward. And I know a lot of people are saying we're waiting for Cam Ward to have his Heisman moment. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, are people
Where have they
watching
been?
it? Yeah, I'm just like,
Right.
where have you been watching it? And I get what their argument is. Their argument is that Cam Ward is having these great games, but they're usually in for returnings. They're to come back. They're comebacks. They're not put the pedal to the floor, take off, have him with a clipboard and a headgear in the fourth quarter.
That's not
What
Cam's fault though.
exactly. It really isn't. And to me, it's like I think again, this is going to be a wild guess, but something tells me I'm seeing somewhere in the ballpark of somewhere between 375 to 410 yards with at least 4 touchdowns. Because again, this secondary has issues. They're ranking number 87th with 63 completion for opposing wide receivers, meaning more times than not, receivers on the opposing side are definitely going to catch the ball. And again, we saw what Restrepo did last week. We saw what all of our guys did last week. We've got a healthy core right now in that receiving core, and who knows? Again, there was decent action out of the tight end room last week, but something tells me we're going to utilize our tight ends a little bit more this week.
I
Um,
love the personnel groupings though. Like they went 4 tight ends in the goal line a
yep,
couple times, like that Cam McCormick touchdown. But you could see like what I love that what Shannon Dawson and what Cam Ward are doing with this offense is that you'll get the same look week after week, but there's always a new wrinkle out of that look. So if they're saying like, oh, there's 3 route combinations that come out of this look, the next week there's like 5 or 6 route combinations that come out of it. So I love what
yeah,
they're doing. I love that they're introducing multiple tight ends into different sets because it started with like we even saw 2 running back sets last week with Mark Fletcher and Damian Martinez. So imagine a couple of like 2 running back, 2 tight end
oof,
formations where you're playing some like superpower football.
oh yeah.
That's going to be some fun stuff to watch. See where this
I
this
mean,
air raid offense goes with all of
I
these different tight ends.
I even love the use of Lofton as a fullback. I mean, I can't even remember the last time we even had a fullback dive, and seeing that this past weekend, I was like, that's very interesting. It's like that's going into the bag, and so I think Shane Dawson's going to be he's going to pull one more scheme. Just and I don't think it's to necessarily go up on Georgia Tech. I think it's actually preparation for Charlotte
Yep.
and beyond. I think he wants to kind of get the guys familiar in game with some of these schemes and some of these plays, and then go from there. You know what I mean? Like, and really kind of open it up when we get into Charlotte and when we get into hopefully the college football playoffs.